Okay, I'm going to mix up some sourdough bread. I have this big stainless steel bowl. I have starter. You can see it's risen. You can see the holes in there. It smells kind of tart. Fruity, tart, acidic. So for the bread I'm going to make, I want to make a couple loaves. I'm going to use most of this quart jar full. Actually, I'd rather make 3 loaves or so. So I'm just going to take some of that starter out. You can see this is how my starter is. It's pretty wet. We'll get back to how I replenish my starter. Maybe I should do that in the beginning. The more starter I put in, the faster it's going to rise. But I'm going to make this bread, mix it up tonight, and then bake it tomorrow. So it'll probably overrise. But there's a reason for that, because I bake with the sun, and the sun won't be out till tomorrow, because I have solar power here. Anyway, there's my starter. I'm going to add some water. And I'm lucky here because I have fresh spring water. I get right out of the spring. Now the amount of water I put in is going to determine how much bread I get. How many loaves of bread I have. So it's just, I don't measure things. I just get what I get, use experience. So I think I need a little bit more water. Just a little bit more. That's probably good. Now I'm going to put some salt in. I'm using this because I have it. It's fancy pink salt. It wasn't too expensive for this brand. So how much am I going to put in? Let's see. That looks like enough for 1 loaf. That's probably a good amount. I usually just shake it in. I never even use my hand to measure it. But since I'm making a video, I'm trying to give some proportion. So there. I have the starter, salt, water. Now this is a special treat. This is Kate's Egg Montana wheat flour. And I just ground it today. I'll probably put that in the video. And I grind the flour coarse. I like my flour coarser. It's not super fine. It's kind of gritty, you can see. Because that's the way I like the bread. The grain will absorb that moisture and it'll be kind of a chewier loaf. I go for flavor and just what I like. I don't go for trying to make it look like some fancy bakery with big giant holes. And this is all 100% whole wheat, of course. Now, I usually put rye flour in, mix rye in. But I want to do something special and just use 100% straight Kate's wheat, whole wheat flour. This is a hard red wheat flour. So that's only like that's barely 2 loaves. Yeah, it's maybe about 2 loaves. I'm gonna put in a little bit more water. Now I make my dough on the wet side because, like I said, I use coarse wheat and it's gonna absorb a lot of the water. And I don't do any more kneading than what you're seeing right now. This is it. This is gonna be it. Because I just make my sourdough bread the easy way. It'll be good, it'll be delicious, but I don't fuss with it a lot. And this is for people that think bread making so hard and difficult. It isn't. Sourdough bread isn't hard to make. You can see that's got a lot of gluten in it. You can see it's really stretching out. So I mean, I could knead it and try to get a nicer texture and all that, but I don't bother, because when it rises, it's going to work the gluten out on its own. And you know, it's more messy when you got to put your hands in there and spread flour and knead it and all that stuff. I just use one bowl. I'll have minimal cleanup here. So that looks good. It's pretty moist, but it's gonna absorb all that moisture. In fact, I might even just put a splash more water in there. So you'd be surprised how much, when you make the flour coarser, it absorbs that. So that's looking pretty good. I'm going to get my pans ready next. Okay, this has only been sitting a couple minutes, and you can see the gluten, really high gluten flour. Look at how it's stretching. Of course, I'm not used to using all whole wheat. I usually have rye in there and some rice flour. I barely ever make pure whole wheat bread, but you can tell this really has a lot of gluten in it. I'll have to compare that to the flour I usually use, some organic whole wheat I get. And Kate said this was Warhorse variety. It's a winter hard red wheat, and it needs to germinate and get cold in the winter, or else it won't head out. I watch all her videos, so I know all about wheat now. Anyway, so I'm going to take a pan. I'm going to put a lot of oil in it, because we don't like our bread sticking to the pans. So I'm just using some olive oil here. And I'm going to really well oil this pan. Now the wheat probably won't stick so much. When you start putting other grains in there, like I usually do, rye and some of that sweet rice flour I usually put in, then it can get a little bit stickier. So the trick is I'm going to oil the pan and then flour it. Or another thing I'm going to do today, instead of putting flour in, I'm going to put in seeds. So that's a little too much oil. Dump some of that in another pan. But you can see this is really heavily oiled. Now I'm just going to put some sesame seeds in there. I use sesame. You could just use flour, but seeds are nice because they get into the crust. And sometimes I use sunflower seeds, or sunflower and sesame seeds. Just shake that around. See, I need more, because I want to put a heavy coat of these seeds. It's going to keep the bread from sticking in the pan. Just spreading that, shaking that around, and sticking into the oil. Hope my camera's catching it okay. There, see? It's pretty well coated with seeds. So I'm going to do the other pan now. Same way. If you want to watch it. Same process. Just oil that pan up good. Heavy coat of oil. I don't put any oil in the bread. You can put a little bit of oil in your bread if you want. I don't. I'll end up putting oil on the bread, toasting it in oil after I make it. Because I like bread toasted in olive oil. Okay, got that one oiled. Same thing. Bunch of sunflower or sesame seeds here. These are pure, the brown sesame seeds. They're not bleached. They're not the white bleached kind. We're all about whole grain here. Whole everything. Whole wheat, whole sesame seeds. I don't know if I mentioned, sometimes I use pumpkin seeds too to coat these. Like that works out well too. So you can see I spilled a few sesame seeds in there. Doesn't matter. So now all I'm going to do is take this bread. This is all in real time. I haven't done anything really off camera. A couple minutes to grab my pans and seeds. But look at that. Boy, has that got a lot of gluten in it. It's pretty wet, you can see. It's a very wet dough. I'm just going to put this in the pan. Right like that, just plop it in there. Put a little bit more in to fill up this corner. I think this is going to rise pretty high because there's so much gluten in it. Compared to my rye breads, are a little bit heavier. So I like to show people that it isn't difficult to make sourdough bread. You don't have to fuss with it. You don't need to weigh things. You don't need to measure things. You don't need to knead things. You just mix it up. Oh, I got in about 15 minutes on this. I just plop that in there. There. Now, what I'm going to do is take another pan and put it over the top like this. It makes a nice little humid environment in there. Keeps it from drying out, gives it room. That, or I'll make a little tent out of a plastic bag. And I'm going to let it rise. I'm going to let it rise overnight. And I know it's going to happen. It's going to rise up and fall back down, which I don't mind. We'll see tomorrow when I film it after it's baked or in the morning. Boy, that's got a lot of gluten in it. Pretty amazing. I'm not used to using just pure wheat. Especially, you can tell this is really high gluten. Be interesting to see how it turns out. I might get it like those fancy pictures everybody puts on the sourdough groups with the giant holes. But anyway, what's going to happen is it's going to puff up. It'll probably get at least as high as this pan. And it might fall back down. Now, if I was watching it, like if I did it in the daytime and, you know, and depending how warm it is in here, is how fast it's going to rise. My sourdough starter is really active. And I would say it'll probably rise up in about 2 or 3 hours. And if I caught it at the perfect stage, just before it peaked out and put it in a hot oven, I'm going to get the perfect puffy loaf, you know, or closer to the perfect puffy loaf. But I'm not going to do that for the reasons I said. I'll do it my usual way. It's going to be, plus, if you leave it longer, like overnight, if you leave it overnight, it gives the sourdough will eat up all the raw grain in there. It's really going to digest it. It's going to make it sour. You're not going to have any wheat that hasn't been, you know, affected by the sourdough, which is good. You know, it kind of pre-digests it. It'll do its bacterial or wild yeast thing, or all the above. Lactobacillus are in there, all kinds of things. So what I'm going to do next is show how I do replenish my sourdough starter. Okay, here's the sourdough starter, what I got left in it. Actually, I probably don't usually leave that much in there. Maybe about half this much. I've had as little as a couple tablespoons worth of starter. But here's how I do it. I put some water in. about fill that jar about half full. And I put this lid on. Notice the lid's plastic, it won't rust. It's been in this, I've been using the same jar for many, many years. The starter's probably like 10, 15 years old or older. I never kept track. But see the big hole I drilled in the lid? Because when this rises up, if I put too much starter in there, it'll squirt out of the top and it won't like pressurize the jar and break things. So I put some water in there. Now I'm just going to shake it up, get it all mixed up good. What starter was in there, you can see it's all mixed up real well. I'm going to put some salt in there. How much? Well, let's see. There, I put that much in. What was that? Teaspoon and tablespoonful, something like that. And oh my gosh, some people go ballistic if you say you put salt in your starter. That's, to them, that's terrible. I don't know why. I've been doing it for years. You saw what my starter looked like. It doesn't kill anything. It just helps it be better. So I got my starter in there. Now I'm going to put some wheat in there. I'll put some flour in there. Same flour I use for making bread. It's hard to do things with the camera in the way. Oh, I got this fancy funnel. If I'm on the camera, I gotta do things so I don't spill all over. So, there's my starter. I'm just gonna mix it up. I use this big spoon. I'm gonna make this into a thick paste. That's pretty thin, so I need more flour. It's pretty soupy. I mean, it would work that way, but I like it thicker than that. Because sometimes I just use the starter straight into the waffle iron, so I always have it kind of thicker. Let's put in some more flour. That's getting better. It's pretty thick, and it's going to absorb a lot of that moisture too, and it'll get thicker. So I always have a jar of starter in the refrigerator. Let's say for some reason I didn't use this starter up within a week. I would want to take out about this much and then do the same process and, you know, replenish it with new flour. But I always use up my starter. And what would you do with that starter? Let's say you weren't going to use it. You give it to your friends or whoever, or bake a waffle with it. People like sourdough starter. It saves them from having to start it themselves. So that's it. I'm going to put the lid on this. Put the lid on this. I'm going to put it back in the refrigerator right now. And maybe tomorrow, if I remember, I'll bring it out when I bake, and we'll see how much it puffed up overnight in the refrigerator. So this is my total cleanup that I got to clean up. Just the bowl and these. That's not so bad. And this is going to be my proofing chamber for this loaf of bread. I just put it in there. I'm going to leave the bag puffed up like this so that when it rises it won't get in the bag, in the plastic. And I'm just going to leave this sit on the counter overnight. It'll keep it nice and humid and moist. It's pretty warm in here where it's going to be. And the other one, I'm doing an experiment. I put that in the refrigerator overnight, so we'll see how that goes. Okay, it's about 12 hours later. This one was in the very cold refrigerator. It was down in the 30s. mid-30s, so it was pretty cold and it didn't rise much. And then this one was warm overnight. You can see it filled up quite a bit. If you compare the two, it's probably like this one has risen twice as much as this one. And so it's not all puffed up like a normal bread. If you want to do that, you would have made it a stiffer dough than I did. It wouldn't have been so wet and kneaded it more. And, this is the starter I put in last night. Looks like it had a little activity. You can see some bubbles in there. So probably what I'm gonna do is bake this one. And this one I might just put back in the refrigerator and let rise another day or two. Or I could leave it out and it'll rise today. But, of course, this being Wisconsin, the winter, and the forecast said it was going to be sunny today. It's not super sunny, but I'm going to bake it anyway. I think I'll have enough power. I'm going to use a small toaster oven to bake it. Okay, I think it is done. I haven't taken it out yet, and I didn't time how long I've baked it for. Let's get a different angle here. So you can see I know when they're done when it comes away from the side of the pan. This toaster oven makes it a little crusty on top because it's tight, but I don't mind. I like it that way. But you can see the gap here? There's a gap that comes away from the side of the pan. And especially the way I make them so wet, that's a good indication of when they're done because they've shrunk up quite a bit. Anyway, if they stick, you just run a knife along the side. This one isn't very stuck. And then I just give it a tap out. There. See? It didn't stick in the pan. There's all the seeds baked on there. Baked a little uneven in the toaster oven. We'll have to let it cool down. The other way you tell is you thump it. Sounds like it's done to me. You can now when I make them so wet, such a wet dough, you can bake them for a real long time, like way more than an hour. And I wish I would have looked at the clock. See how long this was actually baking for. Probably was an hour and a half at least. But just to guess. See, it's a little crunchier here. It's a little softer here. Anyway, we'll let it cool off a while. And we'll let it cool off like this. So get some air under it. And then we'll cut it and see what it looks like inside. Well, it's not totally cool, but I can't wait any longer. So. Still warm. Let's see what it looks like inside. I use a sharp knife. That doesn't look so bad, does it? See, I like them moist like that because it'll toast up nice. It's almost, I don't know, cake-like. But you can see too, because I use a coarse flour, how it plumps up, how the grain plumps up in there. So that's how I like my bread. I might like it more like that just because it's easy to make that way. Because as you saw, I didn't put much time into it. And I like a good crust too, so you can bake this a long time. So there you go. I just had a good taste of it. It's as good as any bread. It's really good. Now that it's cooling off, it's really getting a firmer texture. So I'd say 100% success. This is the loaf that was in the refrigerator overnight and that I brought in and put in a warm spot, and it's puffed up about maybe not quite double, but I would say I'm going to let it rise just a little bit more and then I'm going to bake it. And the stage it's at now, it might get some spring, they call it oven spring, or it might puff up some more in the oven if I put it in a real hot oven. Whereas the one that I had to go overnight probably rose and dropped back down. So we'll see. This one's about ready to go in and get baked. But of course, the longer you leave it rise, the more sour it gets too. And this other loaf, the first loaf here, has really got a really nice sour flavor. Let's see how that compares in size. See, it's about the same height as the one in the pan. So we'll see how it turns out after I bake it. Okay, time to put the second loaf in. Stay soft. See what happens. We got the oven very hot. Have it set like on all the time and toast mode, and this has a temperature control. So I leave it set about 400. I could turn it down a little bit, but like I said, I like the crust real crisp. Okay, I think bread number 2 is done. I think it's got a more rounded top. Let's see how this one comes out. It is hot. Right out. Yep, that's done. I'll let it cool off. And maybe I'll cut this one open too and see how it looks inside. See, this one's got a little curve to the top, whereas this one was flat. This one puffed up a little more. It's all about timing if you want them to puff up and be round. Okay, time to wrap up the sourdough making video. Let's see how this one slices. kind of warm. Let's compare it to the other one. I don't think this one that I roast today was quite as much as the one from yesterday. Pretty similar. I guess they're pretty similar. Anyway, there's the bread. It's the way I make it. It's fun, it's easy, tastes good. Doesn't take much time. You don't need to fuss about it. You can just enjoy sourdough bread. It's as good as any other you'll ever find anywhere. So my conclusion on this bread is that it's pretty good bread. But I really do prefer rye bread. So usually I would have like 50% rye flour in this. It just is more flavor, and I also add caraway seed to my bread. So if you're interested in how I ground the flour, I have another video on my page of the mill I use. And also if you're interested in anything about wheat, especially from Montana, and how it's grown and harvested and marketed, check out Kate's Ag page. That's where I just learned a lot about different kinds of wheat and how they clean it and everything. So I hope you enjoy your easy sourdough bread. Let me know if you have any questions.